covering 2 verses, but that does not change the amount of time we're going to be here. So do not get excited. Because these 2 verses are ultimately a summation of really 3:1 all the way to 4:12 in James. It's a long, long argument about being apart from the world. In fact, if you remember, the entire letter of James is really a long litany of, hey, if this is in your life, you probably don't know Him. If these are the things you're doing, James is writing this letter for us to examine our lives and say, if these dominate our life. Now, I'm not saying if you stumble from time to time, you're sinful people, you're all going to stumble. I'm a sinful person. I'm going to stumble. But if there's things that are just unrepentant in your heart, and they just what define you as a human being, James is saying you don't know the Lord. That's why he wrote this letter. He's encouraging the first century church. That could be the word for it. But he's reminding them of what it looks like to be a fully devoted follower of Christ. You know, and as Joe mentioned last week, there's this thing that's occurred in America, and it's called professional Christianity. John Piper wrote a book on it. It's called Brothers We're Not Professionals. We've taken corporate America and applied it to the church. That's what we've done. We look professional when we come in here. We make sure we know all the right answers. We've rehearsed all the right lines. We know exactly what to say so that no one can really look into our lives and examine us for the Lord. And we think that's enough. We look at Christianity as this like performance chart. And if I meet all these performances, I'm going to be enough. Just this past week, I had my annual review at Lifeway, and I got the full raise because I'm just that kind of employee. But my boss set me down, and he took an entire year's worth of work and summed it up in about 4 different areas. I exceeded in 3. But I failed in the 4th one, so we had to talk about that. And the whole entire time I was thinking about it, I was thinking about how this looks like in church. And we want to excel in these areas, and if we're not careful, we'll rest all of our laurels and all of our accomplishment in how well we're doing at those things. And before long, we become this professional Christian that just ticks off the boxes each morning and comes. We made it to church Sunday, and we said a 5-minute prayer Wednesday night, so we're solid. I don't have to do anything else with Christianity this weekend. We'll become these people, and that's not what God wants. And the book of James is calling that type of religion out. In fact, he calls it worthless. To be a follower of Christ, and I wanted to talk about that before we get in these verses today, isn't to be professional. It's to be surrendered. You're a slave to Christ. We're being slaughtered all day long, and in this we're more than conquerors because of Christ. So Christianity isn't about being a good singer, or being eloquent or articulate, or making sure I read my Bible every day, or any of these things. Now, there are Christian disciplines that are fantastic, but if those are the barometer of how you know Christ, and you don't know Christ. Knowing Christ is a complete surrender, and those things come with that. But it's an idea of being fully devoted to Him. Like when you wake up in the morning, your day isn't governed by the fact that you have a job in America and then you have to eat lunch, then dinner, and this big agenda of things you have to do. Your day is governed by the gospel. Your day is governed by, God, I want to make the most of this. You've put me in this job. You've made me have to eat lunch. You've made me have to eat dinner. My agenda is here, but my agenda exists because the gospel exists. And however I can fit my agenda into the gospel, that's what I'm going to do. But I'm not going to fit the gospel into my agenda. And that's what we do as Christians. And so this morning, as we come to James chapter 4, we reach a boiling point that James kind of comes back to a topic he covered in chapter 3, which is the tongue. And so without further ado, let's look at that. Verses 11 and 12. That's all we're going to read this morning. Do not speak evil against one another, brothers. The one who speaks evil against a brother or judges his brother speaks evil against the law and judges the law. But if you judge the law, you are no longer a doer of the law, but a judge. There is only one lawgiver and judge, He who is able to save and to destroy. But who are you to judge your neighbor? You know, at the beginning of chapter 4, James says this: what causes quarrels and causes fights among you? So we know that the next verses is him going to be talking about how to remedy these quarrels and fights. And in verses 11 and 12, he sums it up. Don't speak evil against one another. You need unity in the church. You can't be broken down. The Roman Empire is the greatest empire that's ever, except for America. But the Roman Empire, historically, is the greatest empire that's ever faced the planet, been on the face of the planet. Rome was amazing, and so much of their success came through military strategy, their unity on the battlefield. They were ruthless, and this wasn't by accident. You can read some of the remaining journals of the generals. They were so tactical in how they approached every single battle. They were unified, they knew their jobs, and they had a bond that was unbreakable. They knew what the man on the left and the man on the right was going to do and how he was going to do it, and they relied upon those men more than they relied upon themselves. You see, each man understood his role, and the infantry as a unit understood how to work together to conquer armies. A particularly effective example was this formation called the tortoise. We have all seen Gladiator, right? Everybody knows. If you haven't seen Gladiator offends you, I'm sorry. You can email Joe about it after the sermon. But Gladiator is one of my favorite movies. And right when they come in and Maximus is in the arena and they're getting surrounded, and he's generaling, or he's commanding his little group of gladiators to put their shields in front of them and their shields over them as the arrows are coming in. And that's how Rome approached battles. They were unified. But as amazing as Rome was, it failed, right? It failed. It shouldn't have failed, but it failed. And it failed for a litany of reasons given by historians, but there are two primary reasons that I think are relevant to this morning. One is the Emperor Diocletian split the empire into two halves, which seemed really a really good idea, because you can govern two halves better than you can govern an empire that stretches from the Atlantic Ocean all the way to the Middle East. Split it in two halves. It sounded good for the short term, but ultimately it led to disunity, and it led to a drifting away between the East and the Western empires. And then secondly, after that, the government fell into corruption and political instability and civil war. In a span of 20 or 75 years, 20 different men took the lead of the Roman Empire. And ultimately, the Germanic tribes took onto this and defeated it from outside, because it started from within. And different historians debate that, and if you know a lot about the history of Rome, and I totally butchered it, you can also email Joe after the sermon. But what we see, and I run the risk of sounding professional, but in any organization you need unity, right? You have to have unity. And it's just for the sake of unity. That's about as much as the church has to do with organization and professionalism. We need to be unified. We're a family unit. In our passage today, James is going to revisit the tongue, and we're going to look at how words can be fruitful, how they can destroy. We're going to share some more stories my parents don't know about. It's going to be awesome. But with that said, I want you to, if you're taking notes, I want you to write this down. The central idea of the text is this. And when I say the text, I'm preaching on 11 and 12, but I want you to think about what we've been talking about from James 4:1 all the way to 4:12. Corruptive talk destroys unity in the church and destroys Christian fellowship. Corruptive talk destroys unity in the church and destroys Christian fellowship. Look at those first words. Do not speak evil against one another, brothers. So point one is slander destroys Christian brotherhood. Slander destroys Christian brotherhood. James writes to the Christians in the first century to abstain from speaking evil. As we mentioned, James understood the importance of unity in the church. In fact, he's been harping on it the entire last chapter. You can't have unity when we bite and devour one another through malicious slander. You see, in the beginning of this chapter, as we've already noted, James points out a very specific problem that was going on and with this group of believers. They were constantly fighting one another. And he begins to explain why this is happening. In fact, if you take careful notice when reading this passage, you'll pick up again that James is all the time harping on our tongue and our actions. If you look all the way back to 3:1 through 4:12, as I've already mentioned, it's one long argument that we're to watch how we act among each other in both word and action. In chapter 3, verse 9, James says, we curse people who are made in the likeness of God. In chapter 3, verse 16, he says, for where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there will be disorder and every vile practice. You see, James is making it crystal clear that if we're not careful as the church and how we speak about one another, how we treat one another, how seriously we take this family, we will absolutely be destroyed from the outside within, really from the within to the outside. You see, with the tongue, we can either completely destroy a brother, we can build him up, and you know what I'm talking about. It even comes down to as simple as, just God bless you. Just that little phrase. We can wreck people with our tongues. I happen to be a professional at that most of my life. Josh Bunning can attest to the times I've absolutely destroyed him and humiliated him in little lyrical jousting. And he's got me really good. He texted me the day and told me that I belong to the North Pole. So, yeah. But no, we're experts at this. We're experts at just breaking people down. Not talking about me and Josh solely. He has an affinity for it. But in the church, we're very, very good about talking about folks. And we know that's true. You see, with the tongue, we can tear down entire lives. And at the same exact time, we can rescue people with the gospel. You see, the tongue is the greatest instrument God has given you. Because with it, you profess the words of God to people who have never heard them before. But as James notes, this instrument can quickly become just as destructive. We can quickly ruin our testimony by our tongue and therefore alienate people from Christ. And the same stroke is bring them to the gospel. And I'll give you a really good example of this. When I was in high school, this is an amazing story. When I was in high school, I grew up in a town that's for the most part poor. Like, you don't work in that town. You go outside that town and work in other places. It's not a very rich town. It has a really rich history of the mafia. It's called Phoenix City. There's actually a movie about it, about how bad we were. General Patton drove his tanks over and threatened to blow us up from Fort Benning. That's how bad we had become. And anyways, the ramifications that years and years later, where I'm at now, most of the town is like projects and government housing. And I mean, not most, but a lot of it is. And there's only one high school in the town. So even though it was a small town, my high school was basically an inner city high school. And this was displayed perfectly one day when I came to school, and I had found out there was actually going to be a gang war the following week. This rumor started spreading around the campus of this kid. He referred to himself as Buki, really intimidating nickname, was going to come to our school, and he was going to shoot all of us up because he was upset with this other gang. And it was getting intense, and I'll never forget the day my friend wore a bulletproof vest to school. This just wasn't the best idea. This morning comes around, and we're all walking into class. I'm freaking out. Like, no one comes to school. It was like, there were 1,300 kids in my school. I think that day we had 500 kids come to school. And my friend shows up in a camouflage bulletproof vest, and he said, "I'm just prepared, bro." And I was like, they escorted him quickly back out of school and took the vest off of him, and he had to go to school unprotected. But that's kind of the environment my school was in. It was a really crazy school, and it still is. And anyways, with that said, though, anyone who's ever been in public school knows you survive in two ways. One, you're either really, really good at making fun of people, and people like you because of that, or two, you know how to fight. I can't fight. So I had to learn how to make fun of people. And so one day we're sitting in class, and me and my friend AJ are in the back corner, and we're just getting railed. Like, I'm getting absolutely destroyed. We called it jiving on one another. And it was the same exact time when this show came out called Yo Mama. Who remembers Yo Mama? For some reason, mothers have been the target of insults for the entire history of mankind. If you want to make fun of someone, you say your mama, and it just wrecks them. And this kid was destroying me, and he had the most crooked teeth I've ever seen. Like, it looked like he belonged in X-Men. His teeth are wild. And this is how words destroy people. Prime example. And we're going back and forth, and I'm trying to formulate ideas in my mind, and it hits me like a ton of bricks. Have you guys ever seen what a grill is? Good. A grill, when I was in high school, was when you would go to the mall and they would take gold and they would make a mold of your teeth, and they would make this grill out of it, and they would embed diamonds and different jewels in it, and you'd wear it over your teeth. If you were poor like me, you got aluminum foil from chewing gum and sucked it to your teeth and walked around like this, like Lil Wayne. Well, this kid had bought a grill I don't know how they formed it, but they formed it. They made this girl for him. We're sitting in class, and he's just wrecking me. And we're like, I'm telling you, this is like a geometry class. It's the end of the semester. No one's doing any work. The teacher's on the computer, and we've gathered our desks around, and I look at this kid, and I say, man, your teeth are so jacked up, it looks like you had to get your grill out of a Kellogg's box. Now, that doesn't make any sense, but in that moment, desks flipped over, and everybody goes, "Rah!" Everybody starts pushing this kid around, like, because this little white kid destroyed him. And I was like, oh yeah. And I was like the king in this moment. But I guarantee you, for the rest of my time, I had no grounds to share the gospel with Terrell. It was over. I had no relationship with him after that point because I was too busy and focused on myself and my pride and effectively destroying him. I was still in Virginia. I would actually sit in my room at night and practice how to make fun of people, because that's how my school was. And I took pride in being able to destroy people. And I destroyed Terrell. It was amazing. It was just the most glorious victory I've ever had. And desks flipped over. I got taken out in the hallway by the teacher because of the disruption that occurred, because I just told this kid he got a grill out of a Kellogg's box. That doesn't even make sense. But in the moment, it was just fantastic. And I'll never forget that, and I'm sure he won't either. But I wanted to tell that funny story because it really does isolate a real point, that our words are effective. Our words can destroy someone's afternoon, or they can destroy their entire life. Our words can also speak life into people. You see, we have to remember that we wear the name of Christ. In that moment, I wasn't a Christian. I thought I was, but I wasn't, and I displayed it perfectly through my joke. And if you notice, if you hang out with me a lot, I still struggle with this. I love to just rip on people. Me and Joe rip on each other all the time in good fun. But that can easily become sinful. But I'm not condoning it. It's something I have to repent of all the time. And that's my particular struggle with it. We all struggle with words in different ways. But here's what we have to do. We have to strive, as James is talking about in this letter, for unity among ourselves. We have to build one another up, because that's what makes the gospel contagious to the world. People don't care what you have to say if your life doesn't reflect it. In John 13, Jesus teaches his disciples this exact point. And I used to gloss over this text, but it is so profound. Just read with me, or listen as I read this out loud. A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also are to love one another. Now he's talking to the disciples there. By this, so he says, love one another, and love them like I've loved you. It's not just a random love, it's a Christ-focused love on one another. And then he says this is so profound. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. In short, Jesus is saying that people will believe the gospel. They will know you're a Christian. They will see the gospel. It will be exposed to them by the way they see you interact with each other. James is teaching in this passage today that unification of the church cannot be accomplished apart from love for one another. And it's our tongue that's the greatest tool in disrupting that love. In other words, the church cannot be effective in her mission unless we're building one another up, unless we're loving one another. You see, the church has the most beautiful assignment in the whole world. It's to look like Jesus. That's one of our assignments. But this is particularly beautiful because no one else gets this opportunity. The world doesn't get to look like Christ. You get to look like Christ. We're called to leave behind selfish ambition that drives the world and display a self-sacrificial love that only Christ-centered people can give. And from that looking like Jesus, we get to share that truth with the world and bring them into the fold. And it's this repetitive process. And we get to bring people into Christ-likeness through our words. You see, in chapters 3 through 4, James is preaching the same message. And he sums up this exhortation by coming back to the tongue. And if you notice here in verse 11, it says, do not speak evil against one another. And then he uses this word, brothers. In effect, James is saying, because you are brothers, because you're in the church, you should not speak evil against one another. You can flip that verse around. It's the same meaning. Because you're God's chosen people, whom He died for on the cross, stop destroying each other with lies. If you're disciples of Jesus Christ, then love one another and speak well of one another. And it's easy for us to look at this and we can break it down and look at the Greek for the word evil. And by the way, that's talking about slander and malicious intent. But I want us to walk with this morning really understanding that we resonate with this passage, that you're inside of verse 11. I'm inside of verse 11. You see, it's so easy for us to sit back and think to ourselves that, hey, we've got this covered. I don't really do that. I don't really speak evil. That's an intense word, right? Usually our version of evil is really traumatic. Like it's cuss words maybe, or it's, man, when Brooks destroyed Terrell, or whatever. But we think of evil as these monumental bad things, and we miss the point because we're minimizing our own sin and thinking that it's not evil. You see, speaking evil can be that small conversation in the coffee room at work about how poorly your boss handled a situation last week. And listen, folks listen to you because you're a Christian. Speaking evil can be the gossip about the girl who wore a short skirt to work last week. I just can't believe she'd wear that to work. She must be a floozy. You know, we wreck people so quickly and we don't think about it, and we allow ourselves to destroy and dehumanize people off the simplest of things. The election's coming up. Well, I just cannot believe they would vote Democrat, or I cannot believe they would vote conservative. And we begin, and they're our brothers in Christ, and we will begin to wreck them over where they stand politically and not think about where they stand in the kingdom of God. And I bring up these examples that kind of hit us and pinch us for a second because I don't want you to leave today thinking that you're outside of this problem. All of us struggle with this. And James is saying it's the toughest one. It can set a forest on fire, your tongue. And when we speak evil about one another, we ultimately become ineffective in the gospel. And if you don't believe me, think about just how good this feels. You've been there in the middle of the drama when something crazy is going down. Like you're there and they're talking about it. Like, yeah, I can't believe she'd do that. Just the other day, we were talking about this crazy thing happened in Virginia's work. And it got wild. And I was like, what'd they say after that? What'd they say after that? Tell me more about what happened. I want to hear about how she got handled. And we love to be in this. And if you look at our news, well, some of the top news articles are celebrity gossip. Well, Jennifer Aniston's 100 years old and she still looks great. You know, and we love to talk about her. We love to talk about politics, or just negative headline after negative headline. And this comes all the way back to John 13. This is why it's so important to grasp this concept of stepping away and being apart from the world and looking different from them. And we do this primarily by our love for one another, by not speaking evil against other people. Because guess what? If the world looks in the mirror and sees, if the church is the mirror and the world looks at us and sees itself, it doesn't want us. It doesn't want Christ. I've already got that. Those folks are messed up. They've got like 50 different denominations who all hate each other and say they're all going to hell. They don't even know what they believe. You know, this is a problem that's permeated America. And I'm guilty of it. I'm the quickest to destroy someone over what they think theologically. And people down the street have told me I'm going to hell. My best friend is a pastor at a local denomination. He told me, Brooks, you don't know the Lord because you don't come to church with us. Had another friend I worked with at Texas Roadhouse told me I didn't know the Lord because I didn't go to church on Saturday. And the world looks at that and says, they have the same stuff we have. They're just as messed up as us. Brothers and sisters, we have to come to a point where we love people like Christ loved people. Because the world is full of hate, and guess what? We can't reach the world if we're full of hate. You can't bail someone out if your boat's got 20 holes in it. You can't make it to them. You'll sink first. You know, a really good illustration of this is who's seen the movie Remember the Titans? I love movies, so we're going to talk about movies this morning. Remember the Titans is a great movie. You see all these boys go out to this football camp, and they're all racist and they all hate each other. This racial tension's terrible in America at this point in time, and this movie pinpoints that point in time. And what occurs is they go to this football camp and they have to deal with each other. They have to wrestle with each other. They have to love each other. They have to be a team. And over the period of the football camp, what happens? They all come together, right? They get unified. They're a unit. They're a family. They love each other. This is so key to understanding what John 13, and particularly not speaking evil about each other, brings to the table. When they come back to their city, what happens? People are flabbergasted by this. They don't like it at first. They think it's terrible. There's fights break out in school, and the whole town seems like they're against what's going on in the school because it's the first integrated school in their city. But slowly throughout the movie, because they stick to their guns and because they love each other with this unbreakable brotherhood of fellowship, what happens? The town begins to change, right? They affect other people because they don't look like them. Everyone else is involved in race war, and they're involved in loving other races. And I use that on purpose this morning because history repeats itself, right? We are in a very peculiar spot right now where the tension racially is high, and the church has an opportunity to be that unit, that family that says, we look at all people the same. We love you no matter what. The church has to be on the front line in America right now. We have to be able to stand up and say, we embrace everyone of every color, creed, and nation. We embrace you all because we love you like Christ loved us. We have such an amazing opportunity in this time to be that answer to a culture that's dying and is set on fire. But moving on through the text, we're going to read the rest of verse 11. The one who speaks evil against a brother or judges his brother speaks evil against the law and judges the law. But if you judge the law, you are not a doer of the law, but the judge. So if you're taking points, this is point 2. Slander degrades God's law. So the first point there was slander destroys Christian brotherhood. The second point is move to the text is slander degrades God's law. Look at the middle part of 11 again. The one who speaks against a brother or judges his brother speaks evil against the law and judges the law. In short, this is what James is saying here. If you disregard God's law in order to speak evil against your brother, in order to slander him, maliciously take him down, then what you're really saying is, I'm above God's law. You see, all throughout the Old Testament, God made it crystal clear that we're not to slander, we're not to provide false witness. And coming back to that word there, do not speak evil against one another, brothers. And the word judge here, those two words aren't like the rest of the Bible where Christ calls us to look at a prophet by his fruits, or Paul calls us to cast out people and turn them over to Satan and their sin. This is talking about lies and corruption. This, in James, in the original language, he's talking about breaking people down off of false witness, off of stuff you don't know what you're talking about. Speaking out of turn, gossiping. And he says when we speak evil or we judge, we ultimately say we're above God's law and we make little note of our sin. You see, ultimately by slamming other people, when someone upsets you, and we see this happen time and time again in churches, people will move churches simply because of one statement, right? People will leave an entire congregation, disband from their family, and say, well, I'm going down the street because over there they have something different. All over words, because they got offended. And this happens because we make a mockery of the law of God. When we wreck other people, when we slam other people, we're saying, God, I know what you said in your law. I know what you said is right, but I just don't care. I'm going to take this moment to feel good, to get in the middle of that drama, and I'm going to wreck this person. You see, what we're saying to God is that your law doesn't matter to me. We're saying to God, I'm degrading your law. I'm going to take it upon myself to dehumanize this person, to talk about them in a way that isn't fitting. I don't care what you say, God, and I'm going to destroy them. And in the process, I don't care about your law. You see, coming back, we have to remember that the entire letter of James is written so that we may know that we're truly saved. That's what he's writing the letter about. He's writing this to say, hey, examine your lives. And in verses 11 and 12, he says, don't speak evil against one another, brothers. You see, every sin that James covers in this letter is written about in order that the audience could look and assess whether they were actually in Christ. You see, we must be careful not to make light of sin. Well, it's not that bad. You know, it's not, I only said this one time, or I only said this, it wasn't really that, I didn't use any cuss words. And we'll kind of try to rationalize our sin, and James is saying, listen, it's not funny with God. He doesn't think it's small. You're judging His law when you wreck other people. You're belittling them. You're taking away their identity. You're not a doer of the law, but a judge. You're above it. That's what you're saying. You see, therefore, slander and evil speech must be aggressively shut down in the church. And we've been talking a lot recently about moving forward as a church and making it to that next level, right? We've been talking about not being professional Christians. We've been talking about taking it seriously to follow Christ. But listen, you're never going to do that together if across the pews we don't trust each other. Roman soldiers would have been slaughtered if the guy next to him didn't like the guy like his neighbor, right? The whole unit breaks down. It's like a poison that comes in and just spreads throughout the whole church all off of one lie. And so we have to be careful that we don't be that person. We have to be careful that we take seriously the commandment not to speak evil against a brother. Because we become his judge, and we ultimately belittle God's law. And then finally, our last point today is that slander disregards God's position. Slander disregards God's position. Let's consider verse 12 together, or the rest of verse 11 and verse 12. But if you judge the law, you are not a doer of the law, but a judge. There's only one lawgiver and judge. He who is able to save and to destroy. But who are you to judge your neighbor? The natural result, as we looked at how slander first breaks down Christian brotherhood, and then it ultimately says, hey, I'm above God's law. I'm okay with wrecking you or destroying you or making lies about you simply because I don't think enough of God's law. What that ultimately leads to is this, that we disregard God's position. We make ourselves God. And that's what all sin does ultimately. All sin, at the pit of what it is, all the way back to the Garden of Eden in chapter 3, sin was a result of man wanting to be God. We take someone when we speak evilly about them, and we make up lies, or we talk about them without confronting them or having a care about their actual spiritual development. And what happens is we take that person made in the image of God, the Image Deo, made in His image, crafted personally by God, and we just strip them away of all of that for self-gratification. And we become God. We become the judge. And we say, you know what? You deserve damnation. You are condemned. And brothers and sisters, we're not in that position, nor do you want it. You see, we assume the role of God. We take on this authority to cast condemnation and eternal judgment on other people. And James, as he's telling us how to do that, also issues a warning there. When we assume the role of God, we experience the discipline of God. God is able to save and to destroy, is what James says. That's the ultimate judge. See, we're unqualified for the position we take on when we look at a brother or sister and just break her down without any care for her spiritual development. Well, I just can't believe she did that this week. And she might be in the other room. And instead of talking to her in her sin, right, or him in his sin, we're more content to sit in the kitchen maybe and just rant over what happened. Well, I can't believe they acted out that way. They haven't been to church in 2 months. Lord knows what they're doing. God bless them. You know, we can do that. And I'm guilty of that. And I'm using these examples because they're real examples, right? Like, these are real things we've said. I don't want us to leave this morning thinking that this isn't a pertinent thing to our church, because listen, I'm not saying that the Charlotte Road is in terrible disarray and that we're all poisonous. No, I love the brotherhood we have here, but I want to warn us against becoming prideful in that and overlooking the little things that can leaven the whole lump, right? That can bring the whole entire thing down. And it starts with your tongue. It starts with the intent of how you address a brother in sin. It starts with you making yourself God and saying, I'm going to break down Christian unity because, not that God does that, but I'm going to break down Christian unity because I don't care about it. I'm going to disrespect God's law because He said not to do it, but I just don't care. I really want to say this about this person. And then third, I'm going to assume the role of the judge. I'm going to assume the role of the one who's able to save and destroy, and I'm going to decide, you know what, you're not worthy of me coming to you and talking about this personally. I'm just going to just talk about it with other people, and eventually you'll leave the church because you'll feel awkward, and that's it. That's what slander leads to. That's what James is talking about in this passage. But all this talk about judgment and all this talk about sin and speaking evil, it has to bring a question to your mind, because this is the question that came to my mind. And I've already kind of mentioned it. But can judgment ever be a good thing? Right? When we read this passage, I'm sure everyone in the room remembers the end of verse 12, right? But who are you to judge your neighbor? I'm sure, I know I've said that to people. When I was at Temple and I get in trouble all the time and people would try to correct me in my sin, I'd say, bro, you can't judge me. Only Christ can judge me. Which is a terrible statement, because Christ is the king of the universe and He knows everything I do. And He could more than kick me out of school. He can destroy me forever. And I would say that, or who are you to judge your neighbor, man? Take the log out of your own eye. I love to throw that at people. And so the question comes up in this passage of, well, if James is saying that we're not to speak evil and judge one another, how do we do that, right? How do we reconcile these two ideas that we see in Scripture where someone's in sin and we know they're in sin, but I'm just not going to talk about it because I don't want to judge them. You know, like this tension comes up, this necessary tension. I want to kind of camp out the rest of our time this morning on this idea. So we've talked about how slander disrupts the church and how ultimately we become the judge. But what happens when the Bible calls us to judge? What happens when the Bible calls us to have discernment in dealing with someone? And I want us to look at a couple different passages, and I'll just read them out loud for you. And you'll know these by heart, because we have either had these said to us or we've talked to someone about them. But I want to be very clear about the passage